Now, more of the Derek Hunter Show.
Welcome back to the Derek Hunter Show, everybody. I am excited to introduce you to producer, screenwriter, and author Bijan C. Bayne. He is one of my all-time favorite guests. He wrote one of my all-time favorite books. It's called Martha's Vineyard Basketball, How a Resort League Defied Notions of Race and Class. Also a biography on Elgin Baylor, the man who changed basketball. Bijan, welcome to the Derek Hunter Show.
Thanks for having me on again. And I beg your patience with any ambient noise because, as you know, I'm not really kicked out of the house, but they're painting my kitchen this morning, finishing up.
Yeah, we discussed this last night. We were talking about paint rollers, and I want everybody that's out there listening to know that Bijan is the exact kind of guest I want to bring, just like Brian in the last second, just like David Afun coming up. Somebody who you won't hear on every other show, not somebody that's just here to pitch something that they did, like I just mentioned his books. If I mention those books, it's because I really enjoyed them, and I know you will. And when I bring on a guest like Bijan, it's because he offers a perspective on things and offers writing on things that you're not going to get anywhere else. One of those was in his Washington Post op-ed back in February. It was called How Woke Became the Least Woke Word in U.S. English. And as somebody who loves words, I just tore into that. And you won't find me using that word in any of my columns, not because I'm censoring myself or I think it's bad, but it's one of those words that I never use, Bijan, because it's very lazy, whether it's used on the left or the right, because it has lost all fundamental meaning. So tell us about that column that you wrote in the Washington Post. How did woke become the least woke word in U.S. English?
Well, through a confluence of events of the reintroduced usage of the word probably in the mid-2000s, maybe as early as the late 90s, although it really disappeared from the nomenclature or the parlance, to a watering down of the word, to an appropriation of it by groups that are probably the least progressive and least enlightened in terms of the original intent of the word. So to keep it kind of brief, the concept of being mentally awake after having been mentally dead or mentally asleep derives from its usage in Black nationalism in the 1920s and through the 1950s and 60s by groups like the Nation of Islam. One of their teachings, for lack of a better term, was that Black Americans had been lulled to sleep through conditioning and slavery and brainwashing, and that through ministers like Malcolm X, and even before Malcolm X and before the Nation of Islam, through leaders, and primarily Black nationalists such as Marcus Garvey, who familiarized Black Americans more with their ancestry and their heritage, and even a possible return to Africa, they were being awakened out of that sleep, that mental sleep. And that's where the term woke originated.
And people can go read that column in the Washington Post. I want to give Bijan's Twitter handle. That is at Bijan C. Bayne. That's BIJANCBAYNE. I'm Dean Carianis, by the way. I was so excited to get started with you, Bijan, that I forgot to introduce myself. I am on Twitter at History Dean. You can find those two previous interviews with Bijan C. Bayne, and also I'll tweet out a link to that Washington Post op-ed. Love the idea of looking at words, and love the idea of exposing really this term that has become used so lazily. In fact, you write in there that by definition, these white liberals who seek this wokeness, it's not meant for them, I guess you might say. I think you say something along those lines in the piece. And by the same token, you have people who they see, Red Letter Media folks watch those movie reviews. They said there, as soon as a still came out, I think it was of this Chris Pratt movie that's out now, The Terminal List, and people on the left right now are attacking it. When this photo came out, he said all these people on Twitter were saying it's woke, the movie's going to be woke and horrible. And it was just because Chris Pratt is standing next to a black lady and she's merely existing. And it's just a way to shut down minds, which is fascinating and frustrating, because the very idea of the term woke in the beginning was to open your mind, to wake up. And right now it's being used to just shut people's minds down. Your thinking has been done for you. We declare it word woke, and therefore you know what that means and don't think beyond that.
Another interesting thing, and thanks for pointing that out and also for sharing the article and referencing it in the first place. Another interesting thing is it's now so become a pejorative. So people who are not progressive use it as a term to say, oh, I'm tired of all these woke athletes, or I'm tired of all these woke conferences or woke songs or commercials that are woke, when the things that they're naming that they are so offended by are not necessarily anything close to the original derivation of the word. And I know words evolve in the English language, and we're using U.S. English. Yeah. So words change from generation to generation in terms of how they're used and what they're supposed to mean, especially if they're slang. But it's actually become sort of a synonym for liberal.
Yeah, when it's really not. And on either side, I could see it's one of those things. When I discussed this with Professor Claude E. Clegg, who you were nice enough to submit a question for my interview with him about his book about President Obama called The Black President. People can go watch that on my YouTube channel at historyauthor.com. They can stream it and find it on iHeartRadio. But again, I say that because that was a great book and a really interesting interview. But we talked about how Donald Trump and President Obama had the same kinds of slogans, in that Make America Great Again meant whatever you heard, whatever you wanted it to mean when you heard it, and Hope and Change meant whatever you wanted that to mean. And so that's a sign of a successful slogan, right? It sounds like you've heard something. And I think that's the problem with people, the way that the right and left use the term woke, and it puts everybody to sleep, regardless of who you are. If somebody is really trying to help and thinks that I'm a great progressive, I'm a great liberal, and I'm helping, well, then show it with your deeds. You don't get to just declare yourself woke. And if you think something is bad and you have a reason for it, you don't get to just use the pejorative woke and say, oh, it's woke, and then I'm going to say, oh, okay. I find that very insulting as somebody who thinks.
Well, you're a person with obviously a great grasp of history, being a history podcast host. The irony of all this is, in terms of Clegg, is that he wrote a biography of Elijah Muhammad, and probably the first one and the definitive one. So he really would be able to understand how this notion of Black Americans being brainwashed into sleep. It actually, the way that it was discussed in Nation of Islam circles was in conjunction with the biblical story of Lazarus being woke from the dead. So it was like a metaphor, and using Lazarus as the example, and using Black Americans as the metaphorical Lazarus, and that these the Black is beautiful movement and Black pride and owning your own businesses and not begging white people for everything was being woke, as opposed to being like the biblical Lazarus.
Tell you, if you have somebody, I'm going to just complete departure, but Bijan will indulge me here. But I have a cousin, Larry. His name is Lazarus. And I'll tell you, if you know somebody Lazarus and you need to wake them up, you are completely missing an opportunity if you don't walk in that bedroom and say, Lazarus, arise from the grave. But the idea underlying it is really true. Somebody who is spiritually, intellectually dead. I don't mean it as an insult, but we are so often lulled to sleep. As I was talking with Brian Darty in the first hour, we are so often intellectually lulled to sleep by people who just wish to make us really a mindless minion. I hate to insult people, but that's the job. Your job is to make people act and react, and you don't want them asking too close. That's something I love here about that piece. Again, I will put it up, how woke became the least woke word in U.S. English. But I also want to talk about some of your other projects, Bijan, because we could speak for many hours and have about all of the things that you do. Every time I see one of your tweets at Bijan C. Bayne, I know it's going to be something great. You are going to be doing a documentary on the first fight between Cassius Clay, the future Muhammad Ali, and Sonny Liston. That's a fight I discussed in my interview with Todd D. Snyder about his book, Bundini, Don't Believe the Hype, and another book I just love, right? So tell us,
Yeah.
what was your angle on that fight? What makes it so pivotal? And is Bundini going to make a little appearance in that?
Yeah, so Bundini will be a co-star as he was during Ali's career. And our take on the fight, or our takeaways about the fight, is that the upset changed the world in the because it gave Muhammad Ali, who was then Cassius Clay before the upset, but little beknownst to most of the media, he had already converted to Islam. He hadn't come public with it, and he actually, the promoter for the fight threatened to cancel because Malcolm X was, as people know, hanging around the camp in Miami Beach, and that was sort of a damper on the gate, so to speak. So the promoter, Bill McDonald, threatened to cancel if Ali didn't denounce, or Cassius Clay then didn't denounce Malcolm X's presence and any alliance with black separatism. So back to your question, we show in the documentary, and there'll probably be an accompanying podcast and pictorial book, how many things that we take for granted, or how many things in this country changed with that shocking upset in terms of, the platform it gave Ali. It was really the last time period when he and Malcolm X were close. It changed the way the press began to view athletes in terms of their outspokenness socially, and also braggadocio, and the, sort of laid the path for the Joe Namath and the cocky athlete having to be not necessarily accepted by media and fans, but at least, it became a little bit more commonplace. And the generation of journalists, and to some extent the fans, who were, largely old enough to remember, World War II, middle-aged, suburbia, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, the brash person that they thought had no chance of defeating Sonny Liston, all talk, no action, triumphed that night. And, it not only shook up the boxing world, it really changed American in ways that we don't see so long, and because a lot of us weren't around then, or were very small children when it happened. One of the ways it changed the country was that at the time, there was really a mainstream discussion of banning the sport, because Davy Moore had been killed in the ring as a result of injuries suffered in the ring in the early 60s, and so had Benny the Kid Paret, and they were champions. And those were nationally televised fights. So there was talk in Congress. There were op-eds about banning boxing in the U.S. And Cassius Clay, maybe not single-handedly revived the sport, but he played a large part in saving the sport. So we talk about that, and then we just talk about all the things that we now know and think of that would not have happened had he lost the Liston.
And that's such a pivotal moment also with Bundini, who I mentioned, when he goes in there. And at this point, Cassius Clay is predicting fights, and he's very much already has some of that swagger, and he's predicting what round I'm going to knock this guy out. I'm going to knock him out in the third round. He goes and does it. I'm going to knock him in the fifth round. Bundini's is the guy. He's the angel on his shoulder, really, that goes in there and he says, well, are those guys throwing these fights? How are you doing this? You really think you're going to go in here and fight the champ? And this is the first time he meets him. And Ali opens up to him and says, no, I don't know. I'm scared. I'm going to go out there. It's Sonny Liston. It's Sonny Liston. He's going to kill me. And yet he grows from that fight to become a guy who's literally, as you're telling his origin story here, like a comic book character, he's really in a comic book. He goes in DC Comics, he fights with Superman for charity, I think it was. But that's just such a great moment, and I hope people will check that out. I also want to ask about one of your other documentaries, because I want people to hear about it. And again, on Derek's show here, you can have any guest you want. I want it to be somebody like you, Bijan, things that they're not going to hear about, and they can tell their friends and go watch it themselves, feed their mind, because that's what is important to me, and also to be entertaining. But you're producing a documentary on the T.A.M.I show. And to me, the first place I heard, I think the T.A.M.I show mentioned in popular culture was the Police, the British band, the Police name-checked it, the James Brown, the T.A.M.I show. In their song, When the World is Running Down. What did that event mean, and what does it mean to us here in 2022 that you decided you want to do a documentary on the T.A.M.I show and show people what it meant?
Yeah, so we're going to do a documentary that will drop in 2024, which will be, believe it or not, these teenagers screaming in the crowd in the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, the 60th anniversary of the T.A.M.I show, which means those teenagers are almost 80 by 2024.
That's what the T stands for.
But
by the way, T is for teen, right? T is for teen. I just want everyone to know. The Teen Awards Music, they say they're not sure of the acronym.
Teenage Music International Show. And on the bill, if I can do these off the top of my head, we're Smokey Robinson and the Miracles,
Ooh.
the Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones, the Supremes, James Brown, Jan and Dean, and I may be leaving some acts out. All obviously in the Santa Monica Auditorium, and it was really, we're talking about the mid 1960s, the baby boom, when the teenager was the focus of American marketing. As you know, the Princess phone and
yeah.
Skin Cream commercials and the Booster and the surf music and Gidget and Dobie Gillis and and the Monkees and all that were on the threshold, and Beatlemania. So this movie looks at that and the power behind that, and how it was such a Patty Duke show era, such a teen-centered media focus and teen-centered marketing and advertising, which we will maybe never see the like again because of, we won't have that birth rate, similar to 1947 through 61 again. So America catered to them. And also,
Chuck Berry also was on that list. Marvin Gaye was on that list. These are
right.
people who, any one of them is worthy of a documentary. And I mentioned comic books. When you have everybody together, that is just fantastic to be able to bring everyone together. And so I look forward to that. I know it's in a couple of years, everybody, but in the meantime, follow Bijan C. Bayne, because that's the place you're going to get so many of these insights. I simply love it. Think it's great. Martha's Vineyard Basketball is, as I said, one of his books, also the one on Elgin Baylor. He has done so much. Bijan, I really appreciate you making the time to talk with me today. I hate to have to say goodbye to you and cut you off at all, but I really appreciate it. I'll give you the last word. What would you like to leave people with today? What would you like them to check out that you bring so much passion to?
Well, I just, I'm a cultural critic, and, follow me on social media. Look forward to the two documentaries that you just named and were kind enough to reference on the show, since they're not released yet. So that people can get up to speed on the subject matter and be able to really enjoy them with some backdrop and the points of view that they already bring to the subject matter.
All right. Bijan C. Bayne is the man, and the projects are great. We will be back after this.